for joining us on this coldish afternoon in Berlin. And good afternoon, Pat McCabe. We're very delighted to have you here. We heard from you since actually our first lift-off guest, Martin Vignecchi from Tamera, who had said you have to speak to her, and up to Bayo Akomolafe more recently. So we're very happy to have you here. And so for those who want a small introduction about you, and then feel free, of course, to compliment. You are also known as Woman Stands Shining, and you're an international voice for global peace, a healer and a speaker of the Diné Navajo people. You draw upon the indigenous sciences of thriving life to reframe questions about sustainability and balance. And you are devoted to supporting the next generation in what you name being functional members of the Hoop of Life. So we're very happy to go deeper into these topics with you for the next hour. And perhaps to start, could you briefly describe your personal journey as to how you got steered, I would say, almost back into indigenous wisdom?
So thank you again. From my perspective here, I'm in the morning, so I'll say Yat E B'neh. And I come from Diné Nation. My daughter says, also incorrectly known as Navajo, but we actually call ourselves Diné. So that's something that's going on with the indigenous peoples and what we now call the United States, is we're reclaiming our original names. And so the world's going to have to get used to us doing that, I guess. So I'll say She'e'iya Tachi Nishli Aro Ashi Imbashichi Ma Edishkeshne Dashanale Klauschi Daushiche Quatao Dani Nishli. So that's our formal way of introducing ourselves. I'm telling you about my mother's clans. And if I were with a whole lot of other Diné people, they'd be coming up to me, claiming me as sister or grandmother or, or granddaughter. Even little kids can claim me as granddaughter. So I just greet you in that way. And I'll also say that I was adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life. And in that way, I was given the name Weyakpa Najin Win. And I translate that roughly into English as womaning, standing, shining. And I say it that way because our languages are actually almost all primarily verbs. And I find that really interesting that it reflects what science is also discovering, that really everything is energy, everything is in motion. And even solid things are just very slow molecules. So acknowledging that to be this feminine aspect of our kind, I am an energy. I am a catalyst. I am a motion. I'm an action in this circle of life. So it's really important for me to have you know who's speaking to you today, because you might be making some assumptions, seeing me, the way I look, and etc. But I want to tell you, the story of my family is the story of the United States history as well. In the mid-1800s, the Diné people, there was a decree from the United States government that any male member of our people had to turn themselves in, or they could be captured or killed. And so it was obviously a very traumatic and tumultuous time for our nation. And all our people were rounded up and taken to a concentration camp in the southern part of the state of New Mexico. And many of our people perished in that process. Many of them perished in that camp. We were given very little to survive. We weren't even given shelter, they say. We had to dig holes in the ground and put carpets over the top as a shelter. So it was a very, very difficult time. And so in order to get out of that situation, we were called on to sign a treaty. We were offered an opportunity to sign a treaty. And in that treaty, it said that we were to send our children to their schools. And this happened to almost every indigenous nation, I believe, in the United States at that time. And so this became the history and the terrible legacy of the residential boarding school. And so my grandparents were taken into these boarding schools, and that's actually where they met. And then they sent their children there for a variety of reasons. One, our way of life, our economic system, so to speak, if we can call it that. It's actually, I call it a science of right relations more than an economy, but that was being dismantled, and we were being brought into the modern world, or the American systems. And right at that time was the Great Depression, so that crashed, and so we were in a very difficult place. So my mother says that the grandmothers, their mothers said that it was actually a very good thing that they were able to send their children to these schools. So nothing's ever black and white, because it was really it was very hard to help our families survive at that time. So my parents went to this residential boarding school, and I guess the thing to know about that, maybe some of you do know about that, is that we weren't allowed to speak our language or to practice our culture in those places. In fact, it was stated very clearly that the goal was to make our own cultures so repulsive to us that we would never want to return to them. So that was a primary goal of these schools, and I'm going to say that it was quite effective in my family. So by the time I came along, my immediate family and cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, they were no longer speaking the language to me, and they were no longer practicing our traditions. So so here I come along, and I'm being raised to be able to compete in modern world paradigm. My parents actually gave me some of the really amazing opportunities to be able to do that, to have experiences, to rub elbows, so to speak, with some of the higher and most elite academic institutions in the United States, and et cetera. But you know what? It was breaking my heart, and it was breaking my spirit. I excelled in school, but my soul was dying. And so I ended up leaving those systems, and but I was still really suffering, because I look like this, and yet I don't know what not only modern world expects me to know, but I don't know what even my own elders expect me to know. Every time they would speak the language to me, they would say, I love. Well, you heard the language. It's such an amazing, beautiful language, so powerful. And so I always let them talk to me as long as they want, and then there comes the terrible moment when I have to say, "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying," and their response so often was to say to me, "Shame on you," and so I really took that shame on. And the thing about that I want to say is that as I began to travel the world and talk to indigenous peoples in Bali, in Chile, in all different places on the planet, I found that is something that we really share in common, that is part of the fallout of colonization and part of the fallout of attempted genocide, is we all had that sense of we're supposed to know something that we don't know, and that dynamic of shame really made it hard to go back and try to learn. But I guess I'll kind of get to the current time here. So at a certain point in my life, I was in a self-destructive mode. Many indigenous peoples, it takes, that's what's so heartbreaking for me today, to see events taking place, actions taken by the United States government, but also other world governments and other nations, is just seeing that these generations of trauma that my family is living, that we know so well, are just now being set in motion. Just now, 7 generations are being set in motion to have to try to heal these traumas, right? And that's what's very hard for me to watch in modern world right now. So in my family, we're at 4th generation now, and we're doing our healing work, but it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, and it's pretty difficult to watch your children try to navigate that. So I sent out a cry when I was 29 years old, and I didn't know to what. But what came back to me in answer was I was invited to my first Native American ceremony, and I was invited to a Lakota sweat lodge, and that changed everything for me. To to be able to pray in that way, and everything in my body, mind, heart, and spirit responded, and I found home. And that has been the guiding force, I'm going to say, in my life for the last 27 years. And it has also led me back to my own people's culture. So I'm now encountering elders who understand the events of history and who have no desire to shame anybody for seeking out our culture and our language. And so I'm able to come back home, I guess you could say. So I say that's my greatest gift to the world is describing my journey, coming back home to this indigenous way of knowing, this alternate paradigm, the original, one of the more ancient, and I don't even say original paradigms of humanity living on Earth and understanding of how to be here.
And this intergenerational pain that you somehow navigate and try to heal on a personal level, but then went back also with the children, with the community. I mean, how do you balance the beautiful experiences, the healing experience, the rituals, the joy that is in the culture, and with this generation of pain that everyone carries? Because to me, this is it's just an alarm signal and a learning that we all can take. What happens when people overrun other people and thinking they're worth more? And so, do you feel like you're freeing yourself? Is it a really uphill? Like, how do you navigate this pain with the beauty you have in your culture?
It was very slow going and deep trudging work for quite a long time, for many years of my life, and I don't ever put it down. I say that the difficulties in my own experience as human in family and on Earth was definitely the experience of the fallout of the traumas of attempted genocide in my family. And so, it has been difficult work, and I think what really inspired me to do it was actually one time when one of those elders said, shame on you that you don't understand the language, shame on you that you can't speak the language. And I walked away, stung, and my feelings hurt, and because I had made a vow early in my life that my answer to that problem was, I'm just not going to be around other Native people. I'm not going to be around my own people. I'm not going to be around other Native people. And my parents, like I said, set me on this track of high academics and et cetera. So, that was kind of easy to accomplish if I were going to stay there. But my soul and my heart wouldn't allow it. But this one time that this elder said that to me, I said, wait a second, how would I know these things, And that's when I began to investigate the history. And I'm going to say that, one of my primary ways of dealing with my trauma is to zoom way out and get the biggest picture I can get. And that's very useful. And frankly, I think that skill and what I see from that view is why I get called on to speak in so many different places. It's something that I have to watch out for, because you can't live that way all the time. Sometimes you have to be down in the nitty-gritty of the personal dynamics and what's really happening, certainly what's happening in our body as a result. But I said, if we look at it, none of us were supposed to be here. The plan was actual genocide, that there would be no indigenous peoples left on our continent. And here I am. And so, my ancestors, the previous generations had to make some really difficult choices about how they were going to survive. Those people that were being marched to the concentration camps 400 miles, they made a lot of difficult decisions. The people in the concentration camps made very difficult decisions. And then even coming out of it, coming back home, many difficult decisions there again. But I have to say, my ancestors made the right decision, because here I am. And so, then I began to look at indigenous peoples all around me and say, we should just be joyful when we see each other. We should just be looking at each other and saying, wow, you are here. We made it. And so, I had this really tender and intense conversation with my youngest son not too long ago. And I told him, because he was confronting me about some trauma that I had created for him. And I said, I know, son, you deserve better than that. You deserved to have a modeling of how to walk through difficulties. And I said, and I just wasn't able to come up with that. And I said, that's what trauma looks like. It makes it so that you don't have much choice in your feelings, thoughts, behaviors. Even if you love someone, and of course, I adore my youngest son. I want to give him everything good. And yet I wasn't able to do it in that moment. So I said, so, that's why if you see me, going to groups that work on trauma, even personal therapy works, and also ceremony. I said, now you know why I do that all the time. I said, because I don't want to be ruled by trauma. I don't want to only be operating out of trauma response. I said, but my biggest inspiration, son, is I know that if we do not address our trauma, we are going to complete the genocide ourselves. I said, and that is intolerable to me. That I will not allow of myself. And so it's mandatory. Now I'm gonna zoom out here a little bit and say, so now as we look at world events, what I see, for those of you who are familiar with what took place at Standing Rock in the United States, I mean, what a moment in human history on Earth. But what we saw was there is militia that is there to defend corporate interests against the people. And so there was this global response to that horrific situation that was really spelling out what the true story is, if any of us cared to see it at that time. That was 2016. Well, now in the United States, if we look at Portland, Oregon, if we look at some other cities in the United States, even what took place in the capital of Washington, D.C. recently, now that those same militia organizations are being turned loose on American citizens. So I guess the lesson for me here is that it's not just the Indigenous people undergoing this destruction. Now it's all the people are being faced with similar difficulties, right? And so we are all in that position of saying, I will not allow this destruction of life, of Earth, and ourselves due to these traumas.
And I think that's a very big point, because obviously I would be curious to hear your thoughts on, in the US, all of these groups identifying more, be it political from the right to the left. So in a way, people are seeking these sometimes very weird and superficial communities that are very propaganda driven, putting people into boxes so they're easier to rule or to organize. But then you have a group identity which is like so strongly and deeply rooted. So I wonder sometimes, what are the benefits of a group identity, and where is it more important to everyone allow to evolve their own personal identity? Because there is definitely a risk, as we currently see at least from a distance in America, that the polarization is just going crazy, just because people identify with groups they made up.
Well, I would love to tell you that being an Indigenous person and a member of the Diné Nation, I got it all set up for me. It's all paradise. It's all right relations, and it's not, because the fallout of those historical events really changed our landscape. And being sent to these schools whose specific goal was to make our own culture seem less than, set up some very difficult dynamics even within our own native communities, right? So we're definitely facing that right now. And so what I'm going to say about that is, I think we as humanity, so this is my zoom out mechanism again. I see, I have this, I don't know if you can see it. My little vision of myself on my screen is so tiny, but I think you can see it bigger. This is an image of a Lakota way of looking at this creation and ourselves within it. And so this is, sometimes I talk about the sacred hoop of life, right? And so my understanding about it is that every single life form has been given a place on this sacred hoop. the platypus, the fern, the amoeba, the fungi, everybody. And we also, the five-fingered one, we also were given a place on this sacred hoop. And so what I see is that every single member of this sacred hoop of life has to uphold their part. And if they don't, then the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And so that's a way of describing some of the events that we're seeing, environmentally. And, I don't know if I agree with that word, but we'll call it that, environmentally speaking. So that tells us that there are members of this sacred hoop that are not upholding their part. And I'm going to say humanity is a big part of the members who are not upholding our part. We're not the whole hoop, but yet every member is crucial and critical to this hoop staying intact. And so when we lose sight of our role in this life, then we create problems for the whole system of life. So what I'm going to say is this about these special interest groups and such is from this perspective, the Mother Earth, we're accountable for the sum total of our actions as a species. That's the philosophy that I operate out of. That's partly why I'm here talking to you today, because I don't see us, Diné, as just being over here on our own, doing it right or whatever we're doing. No, we have to answer for our whole species' presence in this tapestry, of this incredible symphony of life, biology, relational biology, right? And so it takes all of us to be able to answer for that part of our place on the hoop. So I am looking for those people, those other five-fingered ones, and some of them are indigenous, and some of them are not, who understand that we are being called at this moment to place life at the center of everything, to place life at the center of any decision, of any action, of any plan, any dream. And so lately I've been saying, I've had it with good ideas. Honestly, I've had it with brilliant ideas. I don't think we know because there's not enough of us who remember. So going back to that hoop, every single member has a perfect design to uphold its part of the sacred hoop of life. The dolphin has its perfect design. The gorilla has its perfect design. And we also have a perfect design to uphold our part of the hoop. But do we know what it is? Do we remember what it is? I'm going to say that we've gotten very distracted. We don't necessarily know. And so I'm looking for those people who recognize that this is the call for our kind, the five-fingered ones, of whatever race, color we are. So this is also describing that. This is also describing all the colors of man, as they say, black, red, yellow, and white. To come together and say, wait a minute, how do we uphold our part of this sacred hoop? And I'm going to say that, from traditional teaching, we say that all of those other life forms, they were here before us. And even, I guess, our science says that, right? We were the last to arrive. So we take that as this linear progression into us being the pinnacle of the life forms on Earth. But from indigenous perspective, we do it the other way. So we're actually the babies. And we have to learn how to be here. So who's going to teach us? Well, all those other members of the sacred hoop of life that have already been here, and the author, Barry Lopez, he talks about the impeccable way in which they conduct their lives. Impeccable in what way? Impeccable in that they know how to enact their thriving life design such that they don't prevent any other member on that sacred hoop from enacting their perfect design for thriving life. I mean, that's a task, to be able to live in a way that only supports and augments every other life form. And so that's something that we haven't, that we have forgotten. So special interest groups, Mother Earth, I'm going to say, she's not saying, well, those Diné are doing great, so we're going to let them thrive, but those people over in Sweden or whatever, they got it all. No, we have to answer for our whole kind here, and so we are all in it together.
And so how can we reconnect to that? What can we do at our own level to, and you probably have been experiencing, I mean, you led a lot of different practices. So is it through reconnecting with the earth? Is it through individual practices? Like how can we make sure that our species can serve the living world the same way than the other 9 million organisms do?
I think it helps to recognize where we are. So who we are, where we are, how it is. That's worldview, right? And so part of what I feel like my task is in the world is to try to describe where we are. And so from in my ceremonial life, I have these spirit helpers that are talking to me. They have found a way to get through to me and communicate with me in such that I can really hear it, understand it, and act upon it. So that's a critical part, as it turns out, of how to be here. And I guess I'll start here and say that there's a native scholar. His name is Greg Kahete, Dr. Greg Kahete, and he wrote a book called Native Science. And he said he was noticing in his studies, he said, he was looking at the early anthropologists and archaeologists and such that came to what we now call the United States and were observing these indigenous peoples. And he said, they always say about us that we were primitive and childlike. He says, why do these ologists always say that about us? He said, and I love him for this because he didn't go right away for the low-hanging fruit. He didn't go right to, what a bunch of racist such and such is. No, he's an elder. He has wisdom. So he said instead, there is a system of thought going on over there such that every time those people see us, these words come to mind. I wonder what it is. And so he said, maybe if I understood more about their culture, I would understand why that happens. So he tried to look and see, well, who were these guys? And they were men. And he thought, well, this is him looking through his lens. We're all looking through our lenses. But he said, it looks to me like they are all aristocratic Englishmen. He said, so maybe if I understood more about their culture, I would understand why that happens. So he's like trying to observe their culture. He said, so it looks to me like in their culture, up until the age of 5, they're allowed to sing, dance, play, pretend, etc. But at the age of 5, that gets cut off. And at that moment, it's time to get down to the serious business of becoming the educated man, right? That might sound familiar to some of us. Sounds familiar to me, right? And so he says, from that point on, the primary activity for them is to hone the intellect, right? And all these other activities can be hobbies, but the primary goal is to cultivate the intellect. So here come these guys from that perspective. They come over and they see us. Well, what are we doing? We're singing, we're dancing, we're having conversations with things they say you can't have conversations with trees. Stones aren't alive. Turns out stones are very alive. We were seeing things they couldn't see, and so their only conclusion was, wow, these are primitive and childlike people. Even their grown men are engaged in the activities of children. Wow. Well, when I read that, my whole world exploded. I mean, I have to thank Dr. Greg Kahete because my whole work has been born out of that moment of that aha. Because what I said to myself then was, wow, so the other part of that story is my people have never stopped those activities from birth until death. So if we think back, and we have a young person sitting there too, so she's right in it right now, of how alive everything was when we were children. We had many playmates that were not human. So imagine taking that on into maturity, into intellectual development, into elderhood, etc. And in my case, or in many people's cases, ceremony as well, and developing that way. So what I realized is that indigenous peoples had a broad spectrum of ways of knowing. We weren't just stuck with the intellect. Now, I'm not saying that the intellect isn't necessary. The intellect is necessary, but it's a very specific tool. And it turns out it's not all that relational in nature. it's about problem solving, or as some people say, it loves to create problems to solve. And so it's limited in its way. You know, I always tell people, try having a romance with intellect only and see how far you get, right? It's not going to go that far. So all these other modalities, the song, the dance, and this is what I've learned on my journey coming back, those are ways of knowing, deep ways of knowing and being able to hear from what I call the larger community, which is the rest of this sacred hoop of life, but also, you know, for those of you who can go there, this spiritual community. There is a spiritual community that is very, very concerned with us and with this Mother Earth. And even the physical nature of the earth, again, the stones, also have a spiritual component that has wisdom and ability to interact with us and that we can have relationship with. So the other thing that I often say in my talks is, if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years. There's evidence now just coming out in the United States of human presence there 132,000 years ago, right?
Wow.
So we should be consulting with these people who've known how to be in place for that period of time in relative health, harmony, and happiness. Now, what I want to point out too, that is really kind of just occurring to me on a very deep level, is that these people, so there were millions of peoples on our continent over here that were thriving. There were vast civilizations. Their land management practices extended hundreds of miles. And they were creating thriving life and abundance such that it could have gone on indefinitely. Indefinitely. Always creating abundance, never depleting. Imagine. So that's what we say we're all looking for. Man, that's like our utopia modern dream. How do we do it? How do we do it? Well, guess what? People were already doing that. And it got interrupted. And it got relegated to primitive and childlike, right? So I guess what I want to say is this, is that, sorry, giving me troubles here. Ooh, sorry. Somehow all my devices got connected and now I'm in trouble. So what I say then is it an accident that these peoples who had a broad spectrum of ways of knowing also have this deep, deep understanding of sustainability? And I'm going to say no, that's no accident. And what that tells me is that's a requirement for having this sustainability that we are so desperately seeking right now. So this is why I say it helps for us to understand where we are. We're so top heavy. Everything about our systems is all about intellect. And that is not the modality to get us to a place of relationship deep enough such that we could have this sustainability that we dream of. Maybe I'll stop there.
And the amazing thing it seems right now, because I mean, you were talking about the trauma that you need to deal with the people, but at the same time, this richness, there is such a big openness currently, and so an opportunity to take it beyond, and because the knowledge you have since and that you're connecting yourself with, I mean, that's what so many people and we're looking for. I mean, gladly, there are still pockets of survival of these deeply rooted histories and cultures, and so at the same time, it's just giant opportunity of learning for so many of us. And how do you see this opening up, especially over the past maybe months and maybe also years? Is that something you feel the value is, or the eagerness to share all of this with as many people as possible?
I do, personally, but I'm not going to say every Indigenous person does. There's a lot of healing and reparation work that needs to happen before some Indigenous ways of knowing feels right for many of our people to share, right? I feel a huge sense of urgency, as many of us do, and so I do what I can right now to share what I can. But let's back up a little bit there. So first, again, who we are, where we are, how it is. So we have these peoples who have this very, very deep understanding of sustainability, and they have been ravaged. They have been assaulted on the deepest levels. They're not alone in that. I'm going to say all of humanity at this point is we're a traumatized species. But maybe the first part, rather than saying, hey, how can I do what you do? I'm going to say, let's back up and start some triage here, global triage, and say, first of all, how do we stop the destruction of this library, this human library of understanding of how to be here? How do we stop that destruction of these indigenous peoples so that we will have an opportunity as time goes by to develop a relationship such that we can begin to have these exchanges on a global level? But first, I mean, look what's happening in the Brazilian rainforest. Look what's happening, well, even on Diné Nation, it's this COVID is ravaging us. Look what's happening in Africa. I mean, and you can look anywhere on the planet, and every indigenous people is desperately trying to protect what is sacred to them. But why is it sacred to them? Because it's sacred to all life. They as we speak, the Ashwar are attempting to hold out the petroleum companies. This is in Ecuador, are attempting to hold out business interests, and I'm going to say in that case it's primarily China. So let's maybe back up a little bit and start saying, wow, let's recognize what these indigenous peoples are holding, what their battles mean, and how do we support them. And then I think from there we can get to the ideas of how do we share cross-culturally.
And so, for instance, you've been engaged in sharing indigenous wisdom through retreats of immersions for a few days, I believe, bringing a group of people and really sharing methodologies, wisdom practices. Can you tell us some of these practices that you had? Like, how do you get people to experience this indigenous wisdom in the nature, connected to the elements?
Well, I do that, but 10, 15 people at a time, right? So as we're talking about this urgency and we're talking about things, quote, as modern world likes to say, at scale, I feel it's very powerful. I feel it's very deep, and I feel like I'm creating what I like to call lifeboats of coherence on the planet by doing those things. But I think, as I listen to you, you're talking about a global movement. So I'm a little. It's interesting. I'm often talking about what you're asking about, but I'm just pausing here to notice that we're talking about our time and our place right now. So.
But global
so
evolution
again,
often sparks
I go to this place of a big part of my work is actually saying, let's notice what it is to be human. So one of the things that happened for me as I was, because in what I noticed in indigenous culture is gender is being held in a very different way. And one of the big breakthroughs that I learned as the female of our kind is that my biology gives me a spiritual capacity, a very specific spiritual capacity. And here we are in modern world trying to say there's no such thing as gender. Gender is a cultural construct. And I understand why that would happen. And I think it's happening because of the power dynamic that goes along with gender. So in order for us to have equality in the power over paradigm. So the power over paradigm, I say, is the place that modern world operates out of primarily. And it says that one person must have power over another in order to have what they need, right? So everybody's got their eye on power. And anytime we propose any kind of change, everybody's got their eye on the power. And they're saying, okay, this change that you're proposing or that you're imposing, more likely at this point, what does that do for my power? Because I always say it's like in this pyramid structure, right? And so we're all trying to get up a little higher in that pyramid. You do not want to be on the bottom of this pyramid, right? That's not the place to be in this power structure, because that is very likely means you are homeless, you don't have clean water, you can't feed your children. I mean, that's the very difficult part of it. right? And so you're always trying to get a little higher up. So with every change that is proposed, we're keeping an eye on, holy smokes, so is that moving me up in the pyramid or down in the pyramid? Because if it's moving me down in the pyramid, I got to fight and make sure that doesn't happen. So we're driven by this, right? And so I'm going to say with gender, gender has, in this structure where I'm going to say might makes right, and therefore men will naturally dominate in such a structure. So as the women try to express power or agency in this system, more and more they have to behave in a might makes right kind of way. So it changes their nature. So I'm going to say that, in one of the ceremonies I was in, I was told, you think you know what masculine is, but you don't. And you think you know what feminine is, but you don't. All you know is how these two energetics behave in this power over paradigm. But if those same energetics were plugged into a different paradigm, they behave in a completely different way. So that's what I was witnessing in terms of what was happening in the indigenous communities and ceremonies that I was participating in. I was like, wow, this is being held in a completely different way. So what that tells me is there is a way, if we can grok really, that one, there are human beings being human here in ways that are very different than modern world paradigms understanding. And they're under the same sky, under the same sun, with the same soil. They have the same circumstances, but they're going about it in a completely different way. So I think the first step that we can take towards, becoming more like indigenous people, which is sort of what I feel like your question is asking, is to notice paradigm is a choice. Paradigm is a choice. But I have privilege in the sense that I have this culture that I interact with, that I am a part of actually, that is completely different than modern world paradigm. So I'm always navigating. I'm going back and forth, back and forth. I don't have a choice. That's my life. I was born into it. But what I'm finally getting is that many people whose indigenous understanding of how to be here is so far back in history that they don't have access to it anymore. They don't. How are they going to ever have this awareness that there's another way to be human here?
Yeah, like with us in Europe.
So for them, it's like, well, water is about money, air is about money, everything. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be. So that's the first place for me, is to say, let's notice that this is a choice. And the holy people, my spirit guides, say to me, you can have it any way you want it. Do you guys know that? You can have it any way you want it. I mean, just take that in for a second. You can have it any way you want it, they said. But right now, you're saying with your words, your thoughts, your actions, your intentions, and most of all, your beliefs, that you want it like this. So you're sitting here saying, this sucks, this is terrible, I can't stand this. But you're not recognizing that this is not reality. This is a choice among many realities. So for me, on a global scale, I feel like this is a more relevant place to start talking about this change. It's saying, let's notice this, and we are noticing this. So these structures right now are crashing and burning because we are not aligning with the rules of life on this Mother Earth. Guess what? She's the boss. She makes the rules. We thought we could make her follow our rules. No, not going to happen. So we have to begin to follow her rules of how life thrives here. And so all of these structures, I'm going to say, even for the last 5,000 years that have arisen, that we've created, our best thinking, our brilliance, right? And all moving out of this, power over paradigm. None of them were created saying we must put life at the center. None of them were created with that in mind. And now we're being called to do what? To recognize that life needs time, attention, and consideration at a minimum. We have to put it at the center. So we keep looking to all these systems that have arisen, that we've created, for answers. and we're not finding very many. And I want to say, it's not that we're just doomed and the Mother Earth is angry. And no, it's that those systems were never created to solve the problem that we are facing right now. So we have to look somewhere else. Where do we look?
To the fire.
I'm going to let you get a word in edgewise here in just a second. But I want to say that that for me, when I asked about that, the answer that came was surprising. It says you need to look to radical self-love and radical self-trust. Just like I did when that elder said, shame on you. I said, you know what if I don't take on that shame? What if I see myself as part of a larger story? But I have inherent worth that is worth saving. And even as I am precious to this creation, and I am precious to this Mother Earth, and I have a possibility for being a part of thriving life.
And so, I think we're very keen on knowing, because on knowing how can we, even us without, in Europe, there are barely any indigenous cultures being left. So there is a disconnect, and at the same time, there is a very deep longing to at least get the perception that paradigm can be different, which I think is something that we encounter when we are much more back close to observation, deep attention of the sky, the water, the fire. Is that something that you found, for instance, in rituals and ceremonies? You've been attending many of them. So what are some of these experience that brought you the realization that this paradigm can be different?
So, again, as long as we're looking at this, where we are and who we are, and maybe how it is through intellect, our understanding and our vision of how to be here is incomplete, like hugely incomplete. So first of all, let's just notice that. So any activities, so this whole movement towards somatic work, right? Seeing what the body is saying. They say the body keeps score, right? So the body's been keeping score about this. This body is designed to sync with this Mother Earth. And yet we've just been ignoring, and I have too, ignoring the body and being up here. I've had to remind myself, Pat, you live in a body, don't forget. Like that's how deep it gets, right, with being up here. So you got to do something about this body you're in. So those somatic works are really powerful. Breath work, such and such. Those are places that modern world, I find very powerful, that modern world has to make these connections. But I am going to say, as an indigenous practice, where I always tell people to start by going out when that beautiful holy star that keeps life in this place, so here's this holy star, here's the Mother Earth. They're having this billions of years old conversation. They are old lovers. And we are their children, and we stand in between their conversation. Their conversation is all about life. And their conversation is actually all about evolution too, because this Mother Earth is moving through the cosmos. It's moving into different energetics and different possibilities all the time. So not only are we trying to have a relationship with Mother Earth, but Mother Earth is trying to keep herself in a place to hold her place among the solar system and among the cosmos, right? So there's giant conversations going on here. So here we are, these little Earth children in between our parents' love making and love conversation. It's an astounding, beautiful place to be on this jewel of creation. So if we get up in the morning and present ourselves to be in the midst of that conversation, and if we make an offering, so for us in Lakota way, we'll make tobacco offering usually. In Diné way, we'll make cornmeal or corn pollen offering, right? And so, I've worked with people in England quite extensively, and I've always asked them, well, what kind of offerings do you think your ancestors made? And many of them, and the people I worked with, decided oats. Or maybe oats is what they offered, right? So whatever that offering is, if you go out and address that sun and begin to make this inquiry every day, try it every day for 6 months or even 30 days. But if you go out every day and present yourself and say, I, as a five-fingered one, as a child of this Mother Earth, I present myself and I invite the wisdom of the larger community, so if it's the Sacred Hoop of Life community, then those elders to have input into my day, show me. And so my prayer in the morning is, show me how to participate fully in the very highest possibility for life, light, and love today. How do I do that? And then if I want to go there, which I always do, I invite it in from the spiritual community, my spirit helpers, my helpers, teachers, guides, healers, protectors, providers, playmates, encouragers. All my elders say each one of us is surrounded by a spiritual entourage at all times. We weren't sent here alone. And they want to help. They want to have input into our lives. But they can't, because this place is governed by the law of free will. They cannot unless we ask. So this is a formal gesture way of asking. And I'm going to say that there are five-fingered ones in every part of the earth that have long histories, long lineages of doing this practice, of making that offering, of rising to meet the sun, presenting yourself and acknowledging that you're a part of this larger community and asking to be held as family and to be instructed by the elders of this family as to what you personally can do to be here, right? So that's a very, very deep ceremony that doesn't really belong to anybody. It belongs to humanity. That is a gesture that is known by the earth community, by the spiritual community, of how human beings behave when they are seeking that guidance.
And how do the elements help you and us there? Like the water, which is, I know, important for you and everyone, and you find beautiful words.
So that's another place, this holy Miniwa Chozane Wakan, that's how we'd say it in Lakota. And after Standing Rock, maybe many of you heard that Miniwa Choni, they said. And so this is talking about this one. So again, it's about an awakening and a reckoning of the reality. What is this one? Dr. Emoto from Japan began to expand our insight into what this one is, and his work pointed to the fact that this water has consciousness. It's listening to us. When he spoke certain words to this one, and then froze those water crystals and saw their formations, he saw that this water is responding to my feeling, to my intention, to my words, to my thoughts. So he pointed out what Indigenous people have been saying for a long time. This one has consciousness. So not only is it life, it's the lifeblood of all living things. It's alive. And so when we interact with this one, to do that in a conscious way and to acknowledge, Holy Elder, Holy Water of Life, because this one has been here since the very beginning. So that's what our science says. It's always been the same water from the very beginning. So every single life being has had a drink of this one. Tyrannosaurus Rex had a drink of this water in this glass right here. But not only that, all of my elders, all the Diné elders going back and back and back, even the ones that lived in the time before this chaos, that had deep, deep knowledge of how to be here, they drank from this water. Every one of your ancestors who also had that knowledge, I'm going to say, drank from this water. So this water, really binds us together, not only as life-living biological beings, but also in our history, in our lineage. So there is wisdom in this water. So, one of my elders, she says, if you need help, you're confused, if you have a question, get a glass of water and talk to this water and tell this water what your question is, what your concern is, what you're struggling with. And then put it by your bed. And then when you get up in the morning, drink that water, and say, I'm prepared to receive your answer and the solution. I have my eyes open. Draw me to the people, places, and events that can help me understand what your solution is to that. So we have that possibility of interacting with these elements that way. So if we just notice that these, also my elders say the same about fire, But the fireplace is the highest university we will ever have. He's talking about the ceremonial fireplace. That no human university can ever touch the wisdom of that fireplace. So when we build that fire and when we approach it with that kind of consciousness and say, okay, this is an elder, the grandpa fireplace. And again, present yourself to it. So for me, I just kept to keep saying, I'm ready. And then if I'm still not hearing, if I'm still not understanding where this input, this guidance, this direction is coming from these elders, then I can also say, I mean, I just tell it like it is when I'm talking to the spirits. I just tell them, wow, I'm seeking, I'm answering, I'm showing up, I'm freezing in the morning, but I'm out here, but I'm still not hearing anything. And I wonder if you could say it to me in a way that I could understand with my conscious mind. Help me. I really want to be in this conversation with you. I understand how important and how sacred it is, and also what a long history of relationship that humanity has had with you. So please, I'm seeking. That's what I really know to tell the human beings, because it's a process to get out of this intellect. And intellect, I'm someone who has a gift of being able to translate what the spirits have to say into words, but not everybody's going to have that. But you will get feeling, you will get symbols, you will get flashes. What happens for me is I get like a frame of a movie flashes in front of me, and for some reason I know then what the whole movie was if I just see that one frame. Not everybody has it that way. It's different for everybody. But I believe that all that spiritual help, all those elders desperately want to have input into your world and life and actions, especially right now. So I just keep saying, we just have to keep trying to do this. And really, this is what ceremony is. It is what ceremony is.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Pat, for your time. It was amazing talking to you. Very inspiring.
Very beautiful.
Looking forward to dig deeper into these human libraries of being here.
And we hope to host you someday and see you here in person.
Yes, we shall see, huh?
Thank
you so much for having me. And I want to thank these people who are, I can see how cold it is. You're really hanging in there to hear this. It really moves me. It really touches me. And I'm really honored. Thank you. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for providing this opportunity for the holy people to say something to us, because I asked them to be present with us, and for this very meeting to help us to participate fully in that highest possibility for life, light, and love.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now we're going to sit around the fire and continue